Hello there, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Sims Workshop. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to be reviewing Winterkeep by Kristen Cashore. This is the fourth novel in the Graceling series, and I have to say this one was a bit of a struggle for me. It wasn't that it was a bad book. I will say this is that Cashore's writing. I feel like her writing is very lyrical. She definitely knows how to tell a story. My problem is there is a lot of info dumping in this novel. There's definitely a lot of exposition. There's so much world building. I mean, you would think we're already 4 books into this series. We don't really need more world building, but there is so much world building that it just bogged down the pacing. And the characterization just wasn't strong enough to make me invested in these characters and who they were. I mean, ultimately, I didn't really care about one of the characters to the point where I didn't even bother writing her name down. In my books, you have the Keeper, the mythical creature that to me kind of looks like an octopus almost. I don't know the description, as much exposition and world building there was. I don't think the description was quite clear on what the Keeper is. And then you have Bitterblue, who she already had a whole book devoted to her characterization. So now she's queen. She's kind of dealing with politics and political upheaval. And subterfuge, she's dealing with a lot. So she's going to this other kingdom to see, hey, what's the deal with this? Thought we had a deal. And then you have the third point of view, which is really, here's what I do remember. It is, I may not remember her name, but I do remember her story. It's a coming-of-age story. This girl is learning to deal with her sexuality, and I will say this for Cashore's writing. She doesn't shy away from sexuality and sex and learning to come to terms with what you like and what you don't like as a woman. I do applaud her for that. But her personality was very lackluster. Ultimately, I was bored when I was reading this book, and I had to actually stop reading the physical copy of this book that I had. I couldn't get into it. It was such a struggle that I ended up getting the audiobook version and listening to that, because it was such a struggle for me to really lose myself in this story, because there was so much info dumping and so much exposition that I'm used to. Graceling, Fire, and Bitterblue, I think each of them had a really good, steady, fast-paced. This is the longest book in the series thus far. And it was the slowest. It dragged. Going between these 3 different perspectives, it dragged. I mean, to the point where I don't really think the Keeper's point of view added much to the overall story. Did it add something? Yes, it did. Did it add enough? I don't think so, in my personal opinion. She had a point to make. She used this point of view to do it. Okay, but it was just so much. Oh, God. Like I said, there's a lot of exposition. There's a lot of world building. And it really, really slowed the pacing down for me. I was bored when I was reading this book. And I really wish I hadn't been bored when I was reading this book, because I did like Graceling, Fire, and Bitterblue. I had some issues with Fire, for sure. But it more so had to do with the fact that I was expecting a sequel to Graceling and not a prequel sequel. The events of that book take place before Graceling, and then they end after Graceling. So I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a follow-up to Graceling, whereas Bitterblue is a follow-up to both Graceling and Fire. This book relies heavily on you remembering what happened in those 3 books. So, word to the wise, I understand now why some people wait until a series is over before they start reading it. You have to read this series together. Read book 1, 2, 3, 4 together, because this book relies heavily on you remembering everything, not just bits and pieces, everything that happened in the 3 previous novels. And I think that was another part of why I struggled with this book. Because as good as my memory is, and I do pride myself on my memory when it comes to books. I mean, if there's anything I remember, it's names and places in books. I remember them better than real life. So people tell me. But I pride myself on my memory. I had to go online and wiki the events of Graceling Fire and Bitter Blue. Because I was like, what exactly happened? Were these characters mentioned in Bitter Blue? I didn't quite remember. You have to read the series one after the other. You can't read anything in between. And for me, that was another hindrance for me, trying to really get involved in this book. And it's why I really ultimately had to read or listen to the audiobook, because there's so much info dumping and so much world building and so much exposition. And the characterization, I mean, they all kind of sounded the same. All three of these point of views. There was a difference in tone, I will say that, but the personalities, they just didn't jump off the pages enough to make me really care about these characters ultimately. So, oh gosh. Unfortunately, I can only give this book 3 out of 5 stars. It's not that it was poorly written, but you have to. This isn't a book that you can just be like, oh, well, I read Bitter Blue last year. I can just read this one. You have to read them together. You have to read them together. The author is really relying on you remembering every single detail in the books previous to this one, which I think is a little. That kind of bothers me a little bit, but that's just a personal pet peeve of mine. Ultimately, though, it was a decent enough novel. It was interesting, for sure. I just wish there had been less exposition and a little less world building, and I love world building, but there was just so much of it that it really bogged down the pacing of this book, and it really just ended up boring me. So, 3 out of 5 stars. If you want to purchase the book, check it out yourself. I will, of course, include links in the description of the podcast on where you can purchase the book. On that note, thank you again for tuning into Sin's Workshop. Don't forget to like the podcast, subscribe to it, and share it with all your book-loving friends. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, happy reading.